Okay, how's it going?
Good.
Can y'all hear me all right?
Yes.
All right. Time flies. Eternity awaits. Josu Jeka? Viesh nas Jeka. All right. All right, maybe just quick show of hands. How many of y'all were not here last night? Okay, so we got, okay. Well, welcome. Thank you so much for coming. So I guess just a quick recap. We kind of went through some of his Polish background, early years, and kind of hit the Nazi occupation last night. Lots of takeaways, I think, but I think one thing that we try to emphasize is the kind of formative influences of those in the background, people that we don't know their names off, and how key they were in helping to form the man who became Karol Wojtyła. His father, for sure, being with his father, he said it was like a domestic seminary. Even though we didn't talk about the seminary, it was like my first seminary. Jan Tyranowski, the key Taylor mystic in the midst of the occupation, who was key in founding the Living Rosary and reaching out to those youth after, so the Nazis raided the parish that he and his father attended in Krakow, St. Stanislaus Kostka, and then youth outreach then devolved to lay people, of whom Tyranowski was kind of the most outstanding exemplar. And this is where John of the Cross, St. Louis de Montfort, the first Totus Tuus, it's all coming from Tyranowski to the young Wojtyła. And we have Father Figlewicz, the key young priest from his hometown, and in Krakow as well. So as I said before, there's this kind of circle of sanctity of those who helped form him and those who kind of stem from him, that were formed by him. Many saints and blesseds and servant of gods. And that to me is fascinating, because what happened in Krakow, something there is relevant for us all. It's relevant for the Universal Church. So what's on tap for tonight? Is that too loud? Okay. Tell me if I'm shouting too much here. We're going to move from the Nazi occupation. So then in 46, he's ordained November 1st, goes off to Rome, does a doctorate. He comes back. He's sent to a rural parish in Nikowitz for about 9 months. And then where we're going to jump into is in 1949 is his first parish, St. Florian's in Krakow. And this is where the collegiate outreach begins. As I said last night, World War II is the war that Poles say they lost twice. Ostensibly on the side of the victors, they go from the Nazis to more or less being handed over to the communists. So our first stage here for the first segment is just kind of what was it like under communism? I mean, some of you may know this well. I think a lot of students I teach don't. I was pretty young when communism fell. I know that the students I teach, this is just kind of it's a glimmer in their eye. They don't really understand what it was like. We know the atrocities of World War II, but estimates are as high as 100 million lives were taken by communism. On the low end, 50 million. Over a long period of time, 1917 to 89. But suffice to say, as I mentioned last night, it's best not to think of communism merely as an economic system of distributing goods and services. There's far more going on than that. I think one of the best ways to kind of jump into this is from this Václav Havel. So he was a dissident under communism, became a human rights advocate, eventually became the first president of the Free Czech Republic. He gave us this parable of the green grocer, which we widely hear in his earlier book on the final revolution. Really thinks that this captures the ethos of what it was like. So if we can kind of just go slow in these first couple slides, I think this kind of powerfully evokes what it was like to live under communism, especially here in Poland. The manager of a fruit and vegetable shop places in his window, okay, so this still works, among onions and carrots, the slogan, "Workers of the world unite." Why does he do it? What is he trying to communicate to the world? Is he genuinely enthusiastic about the idea of unity among the workers of the world? Is his enthusiasm so great that he feels an irrepressible impulse to acquaint the public with his ideals? Has he really given more than a moment's thought to how such unification might occur and what that would mean? I think it can safely, so here's Havel continuing, be assumed that the overwhelming majority of shopkeepers never think about the slogans they put in their windows, nor do they use them to express their real opinions? That poster was delivered to the greengrocer along with the onions, the carrots, etc. He put them all into the window simply because it has been done that way for years, because everyone does it, because that is the way it has to be. If he were to refuse, there could be trouble. He could be reproached for not having the decoration in his windows properly. Someone might even accuse him of disloyalty. He does it because these things must be done if one is to get along in life. It is one of the thousands of details that guarantee him a relatively tranquil life in harmony with society, as they say. And then what kind of comments on this? The sign is about acquiescence. The sign is about being obedient out of fear. One of the great slogans of John Paul II was, "Be not afraid." You better believe he is speaking very much to the Eastern Bloc under the thumb of communism when he says that at his installation mass as Pope in 1978. The sign was about acquiescence. It said nothing comprehensible about the workers, the world, or their unification, but it said something very important about the greengrocer. The sign said, "I, the greengrocer, is why I live here, and I know what I must do. I behave in the manner expected of me." The sign, in other words, was a small but real act of surrender to the communist system. Its public message was, "Do not disturb." But the sign contained the subtext too, and the message of the subtext to the greengrocer, to the readers, was, "I am afraid, and therefore unquestioningly obedient." That was what the sign meant. The greengrocer may not have liked putting the sign in the window. He may have felt shame. But he did it. Each time he did it, he said, "Leave me alone, I'm afraid. And because of that, you can count on me to obey." And this is a little parable that Havel can, again, here's someone who lived under communism, who fought for human rights, who became the first president of the Free Czech Republic after the fall of communism. And this parable is kind of designed as, this is a way to enter into the story. This is what it was like. And as Weigel recounts, multiplied by the hundreds of thousands of seemingly minor concessions of Havel's greengrocer, and the fear that it embodied, multiply that again and again and again, and now we get a sense of the daily routine of self-degradation that was life in the communist state. It was life in the culture of the lie. It was about acquiescence and fear and isolation. Right? Because if we all think we're the only ones, then we develop this kind of inferiority complex. And what John Paul II will eventually do is break those chains of fear and create a new solidarity. Because when people realize, wow, you think that, I thought I was alone, and then they're galvanized, they're emboldened, and now they become confident, and the chains of fear start to break. This next little anecdote, this is almost, just bear with me here, this is worth going through, I know it's long. Witold Pilecki. This story is literally unbelievable, but it's real. You're going to think this is like a video game, but this is real. Pilecki was basically a Polish war hero. And in 1940, so we're in the Nazi occupation, he brings his AK spirit, the Polish Home Army, a daring plan. I'm going to get myself arrested and sent to Auschwitz. There, he proposed to organize prisoner resistance, collect intelligence, and get it out to the Home Army, which had ways of transmitting such information to London, which is where the Polish government in exile was. The hope, as you're going to see here in a moment, is if we have an Allied attack, we can take over the camp. And just keep reading. This is Spears Creed. So under the nom de guerre, Tomasz Serafiński, Pilecki deliberately got himself caught in a Gestapo suite of civilians. He was arrested, tortured, and then dispatched to the labor camp at Auschwitz, where he became prisoner 4859. At Auschwitz, Pilecki got busy organizing ZAO, this union of military organizations, which worked to improve prisoner morale, distribute smuggled clothing, food, and medical supplies, and train a resistance movement capable of taking over the camp in the event of an Allied attack. Contacts were maintained with local Polish patriots, and intelligence camp operations was gathered. By 41, ZAO mentioned on the radio and Pilecki's intelligence reports on life, death, and torture at Auschwitz I. So Auschwitz I, eventually there's Birkenau, which is sometimes called Auschwitz II. Auschwitz II is where Edith Stein was killed. Auschwitz I is where Kolbe was. Got out to Polish resistance and thence to London. The prisoner's hope was that these reports would lead to a joint attack on the camp by the Home Army and the Western Allies. Alas, after 2 years, however, Pilecki decided to escape, getting a little impatient here, make his way to AK headquarters and want to make the case in person for a relief attack on the Auschwitz complex, which had now been expanded to include the gas chambers and crematoria at Birkenau, sometimes known as Auschwitz II. With the help of local patrons, he made good his escape in April 1943 and eventually worked his way all the way to Warsaw. Again, this is like a video game. When I was there, a lot of people don't know about Witold Pilecki, but I was able to kind of get books and things that he wrote over there. If you go to Auschwitz, the Birkenau gift shop is much better than the Auschwitz. They're like 2 miles apart, but the Birkenau one had a lot more stuff. His reports on Auschwitz were considered exaggerated by the British, who seemed incapable of imagining mass murder on an industrial scale and without Allied air support. The Home Army leadership concluded an attack on the concentration camp was impossible. Pilecki then joined the AK that, in addition to its anti-Nazi activities, was dedicated to resisting a post-war Soviet takeover of Poland, a possibility not unlikely in the evolving Allied strategy. And then he goes off and fights in that Warsaw Uprising in 1944, that we covered last night. And initially, he's fighting as a private. He didn't reveal his true rank, and they finally figured out who he was. And I mean, this guy, it's just, he was a war hero. Courageous, maybe even a reckless plan, but I mean, let me get myself caught, taken to Auschwitz, and we'll build up prison morale, and we'll take over the camp. I mean, this is kind of like 007, is it not? Now, what happens to him? See, I guess as I said, I have some texts I can bring, I'll have them on hand. I think one of the things about the communists is they very much wanted the appearance of legality. If you look at where in Poland, it was the Polish People's Republic. It's always presented as we're the party of the people. And so, for example, there were elections, and its estimates are as high that the anti-communist party in Poland, as World War II ended and then the kind of new government is being established, it's something like 70% of the anti-communist party got the vote, but then the official tally was 10% for them, 80% for the communists. Right? That thing was rigged, no doubt about it. Arrested by the Polish Communist Secret Police in May 1947, Pilecki was brutally tortured prior to his trial, but revealed nothing that would compromise others. The suborned evidence used against him at his March 1948 show trial. So show trials were a common communist thing. So you have the trial, have the appearance of legality, but everybody knows it's a sham, but there's a deep fear because how do you fight against the system? Part of that evidence came from a fellow Auschwitz survivor, Josef Sierankiewicz, who would later become one of Communist Poland's prime ministers. Falsely charged with plotting assassinations, which he denied, Witold Pilecki was given a capital sentence and shot on May 25th, 1948. At the Mokotów prison in Warsaw, his grave was never found, and it is thought that the body may have been disposed of at a garbage dump near a local cemetery. This was the Poland in which Karol Wojtyła was ordained a Catholic priest in 1946. And I give you this story. Weigel, in his sequel, The End of the Beginning, which came out in 2010, and more Soviet archives have been opened up since then. He uses this as an opening kind of vignette to kind of capture the ethos, again, of what it was like under communism in Poland. A country in which men of unblemished honor and extraordinary heroism could be convicted as traitors and murdered by communist thugs, their bodies tossed onto garbage heaps. So this is creating an atmosphere of fear. And so for Havel's greengrocer, why put that sign in the window? Look, you just do what you're supposed to do and you get left alone. You step out of line and there could be trouble. It could be petty harassment. I've got some examples here of, what you don't get in that grad school. Oh, your parents are devout Catholic, sorry. Or it could be more vicious like what we have here. But the point is, there's an atmosphere of kind of forced conformity. There's an orthodoxy that if you step out of line, life will become very difficult. I am not in any way saying it's the same, but there's something similar in our day. There's a political orthodoxy that one dare not step out of line, otherwise there could be trouble. So what's communism about, especially in Poland? Again, it's not just about economics. It's about defining the present, the public order, what's truly important, the public orthodoxy. It's also going to be about redefining the past and very much severing Polish's Catholic past from their nation's history. So remember, in Poland, they date to this day their history to 966, when their Piast king was baptized a Roman Catholic. The communists will seek to rewrite that history, to revise that history, and sever the faith from Poland's Catholic past. And then it's about becoming an arbiter for the future. The communist regime was not satisfied with dominating every aspect of Poland's political and economic life. Its broader cultural agenda was to inculcate an atheistic ideology and a rereading of Poland's national history that severed the link between Polish nationalism and Polish Catholicism. Just to give you another example, in the late 1950s, for example, the Gabalko regime encouraged free sex in summer youth camps and stocked youth hostels with alcohol during religious pilgrimages and fairs. In 1966, this is a big year because it's the millennium celebration, a millennium of Poland's Catholic past from 966 to 1966. At 25, they arranged a 25-gun artillery barrage to drown out Cardinal Stefan Wyszynski's sermon during a celebration of the millennium of Polish Christianity. No tactic was too petty for a regime that embodied the culture of the lie in its attempt to poison any independent human relationships. In 1964, the Polish secret police tried to recruit Wyszynski's barber as an informant. So things that you hear widely say again and again is a culture of fear and a culture of the lie. This was sort of the ethos. And again, I'd say, so fear, lie, and isolation. If people are isolated, if they think they're alone, if they're atomized, they are weakened. And they'll get in line. This is basically more of the same, but you might take a look at this. The courts are corrupted. The degree of social harmfulness of an alleged crime was taken into account in sentencing, especially with political prisoners. And by the way, one of the reasons why John Paul II was very much against the death penalty is because he saw it wielded time and time again to simply eliminate political opponents by the communists and obviously the Nazis before that. Politically acceptable judges with only a secondary education were given a 15-month cram course before joining the bench and being on such sentences. So the Sovietization of all public life. So in other words, don't think about this as simply a matter of sharing goods. I mean, it's not. I think that's the temptation today. When I look at the monks. We have a monastery camps. Don't they share their stuff? Is that what communism is? It's about far more than that. It's about the promulgation of atheism. It's about the annihilation of the family. It's about a redefining the metaphysical, and even it's got a quasi-religious aspect to it as an anti-religion with a clear orthodoxy that one is expected to toe the line on. There's an expensive spy network. Now this breaks your heart. This, if you recall some of these names from last night, absolutely breaks your heart. In less than a decade, communist organs of internal security recruited or suborned some 75,000 pairs of eyes. Men and women who could keep their controllers informed of any untoward comment or activity by a neighbor or a co-worker. The net result was that by 1954, 6 million Poles, 1 in every 3 adults, was listed on a register of criminal and suspicious elements. So again, this book, in the beginning, more archives have been opened up when this came out. Even Ermolinsky, fellow seminarian of Wojtyła, fellow priest, longtime friend, member of Living Rosary, became a collaborator. The same KGB active measures campaign included placing agents masquerading as Lithuanian seminarians at the Rome's Gregorian University. So this creates that atmosphere. Students often didn't even share their last names with each other because if you said the wrong thing, if you expressed your Catholic faith, do you see what could happen? you could see how a paranoia could easily come about. That takes us to St. Florence. So what we're about to walk into is one of my favorite things to do with students, is to kind of walk through this ministry to young college students by a young priest named Karol Wojtyła. So he goes there in 1949. You're in Krakow. It's basically a university setting. There's two kind of collegiate parishes, St. Florian's and St. Anne's. And this is the climate. This is the context. What is going to develop, and I'll put this word up in a moment, is a group that's going to be known, frankly, for the next 50 years as Środowisko. Środowisko. Środowisko means environment in Polish, or milieu. What it became with this community that Wojtyła helped establish is really a zone of freedom, a zone of authentic friendship, a zone of authentic fellowship, a zone of Catholic faith in the midst of atheistic Poland. In St. Florence, here we'll just kind of dive into this, but given the militant atheism promoted by the regime and the ideological climates at the university, it was essential to engage students intellectually. Wojtyła, who had begun visiting student dormitories and boarding houses as soon as he arrived in St. Florence, making contacts and jumping up trades, started a series of Thursday evening conferences on two basic issues: on God's existence and the spiritual dimension of the human person. Because the Marxist thing was, God alienates you, he's not real, and you're nothing but a materialistic entity. Now think back to Christian humanism. Central to Wojtyła is that Jesus Christ teaches us what it means to be human in the fullest sense. And all that is authentically human becomes part of the gospel. Not only does God not alienate me, actually I find the fullness of my humanity in union with him. The point was not rote memorization of catechism or post-communist propaganda. It was to demonstrate that the church and the gospel had a more compelling answer to the perennial questions of human life than the purveyors of efficient state ideology. Christian humanism, in other words, was quietly but unmistakably counterposed to Marxism. Here's St. Florence. So this is the inside of it. This next picture is a portrait of Wojtyła as a young priest. So again, he's 29 when he goes there, right? So think of this young priest ministering to these college students who are caught up into this ideological climate. Is all around them. And much like it often is today, and here you have him reaching out to them. Let's just keep going with this. This group, these groups that form, this becomes one of the most important and impressionable things upon his priesthood. He always so fondly speaks of his Środowisko. Perhaps the hardest fought battle between the church and the regime in all family life, the communists understood the men and women secure the love of their families, where danger, housing, work schedules, school hours were all organized by the state to separate parents from children. Apartments were constructed to accommodate small families so that children would be regarded as a problem. Work was organized in 4 shifts to make it such that children had to be consigned to state-run childcare before school. Schools themselves were consolidated, children were moved out of their local communities for schooling, and permissive law was passed that regarded abortion as a means of birth control. So this is what he's up against with a bunch of college students. Now, take a look at some of these quotes. These are from Wojtyła himself. In 28 months at St. Florence, he blesses 160 marriages. One of the first things he did is he recruited a Gregorian chant choir. And 6 of that original choir got married to each other. When I had my students in Florence and we went there, and we had already read about all this, we walked into St. Florence, and a couple of my students just ran up to the choir because they just wanted to be in that same spot where all this magic happened. Because here's the thing. I mean, you don't join a group like this to find a spouse, but this is sort of a derivative side effect when people run together. Because here's the thing. Virtuous friendship is about something. It's not just people collapsing in on themselves. Virtuous friendship is about something, and your bonds Your friendships are as deep as the good that binds you. As a team is united in the pursuit of victory, virtuous friends accompany one another toward a goal. They're going somewhere. And when you have a community that gathers around a transcendent good, deep friendships are forged, deep bonds emerge. And again, it's just a side effect, but it happens. I've seen it all the time, and I'm a victim of one of these things. Marriage has come out of this thing too. Low-hanging fruit is not evil, it's just low-hanging fruit. All right, so in 28 months, 102 marriages, he's in intense conversations with, sorry, am I speaking too loud back there? All right? He's in intense conversations with engaged couples left a lasting imprint. He came to believe that young people are always searching for the beauty in love. They might fall short of the mark, but in the depths of their hearts, they still desire a beautiful and a pure love. The University Chapel in his days at St. Florence, this is what he said 40 years later. This is where he says, I learned to love human love. I learned to love human love by ministering to these college students, getting to know them as they move into marriage and having young children. And again, he stayed in touch with them the rest of his life. And oh, by the way, there's a certain book called Love and Responsibility. Guess when it's published?
1958.
So basically 1960. It's the fruit of this. This comes out of this experience. This is not just a set of ideas. This is the fruit of him living with accompanying them, going on trips with them, talking to them, and these deep, deep friendships that emerge. Again, he formed them. But I know this as a professor deeply, they also formed him. Here's our word, Shrodovisko. So with the accent, it's an SH, Shrodovisko. This group originally called themselves Rodzinka, which meant little family, but then this is the name that stuck, Shrodovisko. As I said, it means environment, or the translation in JP2 preferred there was milieu. Because it became this kind of zone of freedom, this milieu of authentic friendship and fellowship and Catholic faith that began at St. Florence. And you want to know where World Youth Day began? This is where World Youth Day began. After a while, this group of young people, fewer than 20 in number, began meeting in homes where they learned each other's surnames. Because now it's safe to do so. As well as in church, interested in putting their convictions into action, they began visiting and seeing the needs of the blind and the sick, who had in contact with the state health system. The glue that held them together was prayer, especially liturgical prayer. Father Wojtyła gave them days of recollection, made retreats to mark special occasions during the year. In Poland, they celebrate name day parties. The feast day of the saint after whom you're named. They do that instead of birthday parties. On the feast of the saint in whose honor they had been named, which according to Polish custom, they celebrated some birthdays. He said mass for them and attended name day parties in their homes. Like students everywhere, they were nervous about exams. I'm sure it's not true here. Father Wojtyła celebrated mass with them on exam mornings and joined their post-exam parties at night. Deep friendships began to form among the students. And what's going to develop from 1953 to 1978, it only stops because he becomes Pope, is every year, a 2-week kayaking trip, camping and the like with this group. And here's the thing. I mean, it's a group that is, there's a core, but then it's expansive. Because people wanted to be a part of it. Think about this. He meets some of these students in the early 50s. He sees them get married and have kids. He sees their kids grow up. In many cases, he got to know their grandkids. And for me, one of my favorite things about teaching, and it's starting to happen more and more, is to see students that weren't in college together, maybe 5, 6 years apart, and to see them get connected. And maybe they both had JP2 class with me here and then several years later. And to see them form a bond out of a common love for St. John Paul II and come off the Catholic faith, all of a sudden, it's generational. That's what happens here. This is the word that describes his ministry. Accompaniment. Wojtyła thought of his chaplaincy as a ministry of accompaniment, a way to accompany these students in their lives. The chaplain's presence couldn't be limited to the sanctuary or the confessional. A really effective chaplaincy, he believed, had to be present to these young lives in the world as well as in the church. Radzinka, that was the first, it's a little family, but then this is the name of the section, Shortovisko, were a de facto underground, a new kind of resistance movement, creating islands of free space in a totalitarian sea. Remember all that discussion about cultural resistance? 19th century Poland, does it exist on a map? No. How does it continue? Their faith, their literature, their culture. Nazi-occupied Poland. What's all this acting, rhapsodic theater about? Cultural preservation, cultural resistance. What's this about? It's about the power of soft power. It's about creating communities that are in love with Jesus and being unafraid to speak that truth and to live that out together. And over time, his conviction is that's far more powerful than guns. Far more powerful than even really campaigns and elections. This is Vujek. So the W's a V, the J's a Y. Vujek. I was going to read it to you, but it's a little bit long. In 1952, I'll just sum it up for you. Basically, a trip to Wojtyła, so he's been there for 3 years, and they're going to take this. He's trying to get these students, and this is real. Get them out of this kind of poisonous climate, get them out in the woods, get them out kayaking, and now let's breathe some fresh air and let's get back to the basics of life. And well, make a long story short, what happened is there's a set of women and a set of men that were going to go together, and the men couldn't come, and all of a sudden it's Wojtyła and these 5 women, and part of it is one. It might be a little awkward to have 1 priest and 5 women. But 2, the communists had forbade priests to work with young people. Youth groups wasn't allowed. And so one of the girls approached him and said, kind of got her nerve, was like, what should we call you? Because this could be dangerous, right? He's not in clerics for that same reason. And he quotes the most famous line of a trilogy by a man named Sienkiewicz, who's a famous Polish author. And he says, call me Wujek, which means uncle. This is where it comes from. Call me Wujek, which means uncle. So they knew him as Wujek. Wujek's young people didn't think of themselves as heroes or rebels, yet the freedom they had experienced with him and among their friends began to spill over to the rest of their lives. So here's some of the petty kind of harassment that happened. This Danuta Skrabianka wasn't allowed to study for a master's degree because she had lived in a dormitory run by nuns. When the authorities seized the dormitory and tried to expel the nuns, Danuta and a friend encouraged by Wojtyła went to Warsaw and asked that the sisters not be expelled, even though their bachelor's degrees could have been withheld as a result. Similarly, another one, Stanislaw Rybicki, another student, he becomes an engineer. Wasn't permitted to make further engineering studies because of his Catholicism. He came to Wojtyła and told him, if someone likes science, that science is going to come to him. As yet another member of Shortovisko put it, we could live more freely because we were free inside. That's how they felt on these trips with Wojtyła. That's how they felt in these communities, that we could be our authentic selves. Because what Wojtyła is going to say, and in a dramatic way in 1979, is, look, y'all, you aren't who they say you are. You are a people of God with a millennium of Catholic faith behind you. Let's break the chains of fear. Marriage was the most important transition in these young lives. Basically, they began to fall in love, as I mentioned. And Wojtyła would often celebrate their wedding masses, holding individual days of prayer, reflection for each couple, and he didn't hesitate to challenge when he thought appropriate. I want you to see the combination of familiarity. These people who were there, they're part of these Shortoviskos. They said, we could talk to him about anything. Nothing was off the table. There was a familiarity. Yeah, you're going to see. As one of them puts it, he wasn't a buddy. He wasn't merely a buddy. He didn't just stoop to our level, rather he lived life with us and called us to greatness. The genius of JP2 is that he loved people enough to speak the hard truths. As he put it elsewhere, when you water things down, you know what you actually do? You rob young people of their chance to be morally heroic. When you lower the bar, you actually rob them of their chance to be morally heroic. That, for me, just to be honest with you, in my conversion, that resonated so deeply. I came to Benedictine College first as a student and only to play football. And for the first time in my life, I was challenged morally and spiritually in the way that I'd always been challenged academically, athletically. But for some reason, that didn't apply over here. Having someone love me enough to speak that change. I mean, it's sort of like, imagine a coach saying, every year I've had my linebackers, they run a 6-minute mile. But y'all, let's make it 8. What's that say about you? You're too soft. It's actually an insult. And I felt that in my bones. If you want a faith worth living for and worth dying for, it's got to be the real thing. It's got to have teeth. It's got to matter. And that's what happened to me in college. 1953 is the first kayak trip. Mass was celebrated using an overturned kayak as an altar with 2 paddles lashed together to form the altar cross. You might have seen some of these pictures elsewhere. They say he had mastered the art of listening, as Rubitsky put it. No subject was off the board. His friends respected him as a priest and experienced him as a priest wholly devoid of clericalism. On treks and kayaking trips, he shared in all the chores, down to lighting kayaks and bearing garbage. Yet there was a reserve about him that his friends honored. He was not a buddy, as Rubitsky summed up this dimension of the relationship. He was style by observing, today many priests try to be like the kids. We were trying to be like him. For me, at least, he wasn't a buddy. When I think back to my conversion story, some of my hardest bouts were with my high school friends. And I think, what does it mean to be a buddy? Say, it's maybe a little bit different, but let's say an off-color joke is told. Being a buddy is kind of giving that nervous laughter. I'm kind of uncomfortable right now. I wish you wouldn't have said that, but I don't have the guts to step in. And in my experience, if you're going to lead, yes, you gotta love people there. Yes, you gotta be open and familiar. Amen, amen, amen. But there is a way of going about it that still issues the challenge. I think being a buddy is when you no longer issue the challenge. You no longer love them enough to call them higher. He got this. He got the combination of familiarity, but also the point of it all. He's considered a fantastic confessor. I mentioned, I think I may have mentioned jeweler shop, so we won't treat it here, but typically in my class we'll read jeweler shop after 11 possibility. When jeweler shop came out, which came out in 1960, by the way, Schroeder-Visco members said, and I quote, "We saw ourselves in the story." Now, no one character from Schroeder-Visco is a character in jeweler shop. But they say that Wojtyla had an uncanny ability to recall whole conversations decades after they happened. And as he put it, jeweler shop, in his words, was his debt, paying his debt back to Schroeder-Visco. They saw themselves in these characters and stories. So these seminal works, they come out of this formative period. By all accounts, the demanding confessor, but in a very different way. The confessor's role in the drama of the human mission was to accompany. There is an accompany a fellow Christian and a fellow human being in order to promote the path of spiritual discernment. The rules were there. They were real. They were to be obeyed. But the rules were not arbitrary. They defined the drama because they illuminated the dramatic tension of life, the tension between the person I am and the person I ought to be. As I mentioned last night, we're all going somewhere. We're all becoming a certain kind of person. This is exactly what virtue is all about, because like acts become like habits, for better or for worse. The more you do it the right way, the more that becomes ingrained, second nature. Think about how, so this is what, think about freedom. We can talk about freedom simply to choose, but there's a deeper freedom that is a freedom for excellence. Think about a musician. Think about learning a foreign language. Think about any athletic skill that is at first clumsy and awkward, but over time and practice and discipline becomes more and more fluid and even effortless. Anybody can hit a lucky shot. The good player is consistent and reliable. If you want to be a great husband or a great wife or a great father, a great mother, whatever it is, the battle is won in the little things. The battle is won by habits, by becoming. See, here's the thing. The moral question, and this is what hit me in college. The moral question is not, what do I do right here, right now? The moral question is, who do I want to be? Imagine if every decision you made was an answer to that question. I am answering who I am and who I want to be. We'd probably live life with a lot less regrets. But all too often in our culture, we separate what we do from who we are, and we say, deep down I'm a good guy, despite what I did last weekend. But as I said last night, that's kind of like saying, I'm a great pitcher deep down, I just never throw strikes. It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense. This is Krakow Square. That's St. Mary's. This, you may have heard of the Bugler. So on the hour, right up here. The story is 13th century Poland. A boy, and his job was to bugle when enemies were approaching. And there was an attack, and he didn't leave his post. He kept on bugling, and he got hit with an arrow. And so to this day, on the hour, they call it the broken note, the hymn. The bugler will play, but won't finish the note in honor of that boy who didn't leave his post. So this is the Krakow Square. And then the next slide is the inside of this church. I'm telling you, Krakow is like Rome, but clean and cheap. I am not lying. I get to live in Krakow. So this is the inside of St. Mary's. So if you walk in, you're facing the altar, it's kind of 2/3 of the back on the right, this confessional. Wojtyła sat in that confessional, and her confessions daily from 1951 to 1958. 1951, 1958. Again, it was partly John Vianney's influence. He said, I too want to be a prisoner of the confessional, because in the confession, here's the drama of life. Here is a penitent coming gloriously before God. Gloriously before God. You know the word Satan in Hebrew, Satan, literally means to accuse. Satan means to accuse. In temptation, Satan's our buddy. Come on. But when we fall, he becomes the accuser. Look what you think you can go back. You think you can be a Catholic leader after what you did? The confessional is glorious before God, and he saw this as the great drama of life, moving from where I am to who I want to be. This kind of sums up what we've been saying. Like many Polish priests, he's created de facto networks of resistance to communism by helping raise up a generation of Poles who could resist the communist culture of the lie with the truth of their religious and moral convictions. His writing never attacked communism directly. See, he never engaged merely at the level of economics. He never kind of fell into their traps. It was always about human dignity and human destiny. And that's why the truth of what he said was undeniable. He was perfectly clear to his readers that Wojtyła was giving expression to a vision of human life and human destiny, utterly at cross purposes with the official ideology. He lived a singularly integrated priestly and personal life that was sharply focused not on defending the institution of the church, but on defending the dignity of the human person, of whom the church was its servant. We'll get into this more in the next phase. But eventually Cardinal Wyszynski and Wojtyła will be, so he becomes cardinal in 67. They'll be the two cardinals in Poland. And we'll talk about this more directly in the next episode, but the communists wanted to pit the younger Wojtyła, who became bishop at age 38, against Wyszynski. Wyszynski was known as being this kind of stalwart against the communists. They say in pictures where the two of them are depicted to this day, Wojtyła always kind of stands in the background, always deferring because he knew the strategy, always not willing to let an inch between him and Wyszynski, to not fall into the trap of the communists trying to divide and conquer. Cardinal Wyszynski, again, he's the one who's going to be blessed next June. He'll be blessed in Stefan Wyszynski. The point of maximum confrontation came in May 1953, when the government announced that the state would henceforth appoint and remove bishops and pastors and require all priests to take a loyalty oath to the Polish People's Republic. Led by Cardinal Wyszynski, the bishops drew the line on the fiery sermon at St. John's Cathedral in Warsaw. The primate, so he's known as the primate of Poland. This is maybe kind of like the president of the USCCB, or maybe the way in which certain historic dioceses in this country kind of, in an honorific way, have more clout. So it's kind of an honorific title as primate of Poland. He said, "We teach that it is proper to render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God what is God's, but when Caesar seats himself on the altar, we respond he must not." The regime labeled the memorandum high treason. The euphemism was an attack on the Constitution. On the night of September 25th, 26th, 1953, Cardinal Wyszynski was arrested in turn, basically on house arrest in a monastery and a convent. So he basically disappears from the public picture from 53 to 56 because he's arrested by the communists. Okay, I think this. So if we just for a moment, if we could just kind of just recap, and again, I think that the deep lesson here. So there are houses. There's a house, for example, down the road from campus in Benedict, known as the Środowisko house, and they got Środowisko over their walls, and they've got it defined. And the aim of that house is to create authentic Catholic culture off campus. Catholic fellowship. Środowisko, for my students in Florence, became a catchword for virtuous friendship. Friendship is about something. Not just running at each other, but going to a goal. What Wojtyła did with these young people, as young college students, and then again stayed in touch with them, created bonds, and they fell in love with Jesus, and they found life. For my part, when you see conversions really stick, is when people come to the point where they're prioritizing those kinds of friendships over there. It doesn't mean you ditch your old friends, but there is truth to the saying, if you want to show me your friends, show me your closest friends, and I'll show you your future. The danger, though, is for a community like that to collapse in on itself. It's got to be expansive. It's got to be continually welcoming more and more in, because what happens is you don't want to be alone, and you're always asking yourself, if I fall in love with Jesus, if I go all in, will I still be myself? The great truth is you find you're a greater version of yourself. You find a deeper joy. You find more fun. Can I say that? This is what happens. Saints aren't sad. Saints are not sad. They know life is good, rich, and beautiful, but they know that this is also a sign for something greater to come. And when friendships are formed with that mentality in mind, with time flies and eternity waits. Czasy czeka? Wiesz nas czeka. So that's the sundial. We'll get there. Okay, so basically what's going to happen next is we'll move into his life as bishop and Archbishop, Vatican II, and we're going to kind of all the way up until he becomes right before Pope, and then that might take us into the end of the night, and then love and responsibility will start after that. All right, so let's, Glory be, is that all right?